7 years ago, I was Aurora, an optimistic adventure guide with dreams of traveling the world. That dream shifted unexpectedly when I met Ethan, a charismatic and accomplished man. Our love blossomed quickly, and before long, we were married. I thought I had found my ideal life. Then one evening, as we sat over dinner, Ethan shared thrilling news about a job offer from a prestigious law firm in another city. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," he said, his voice filled with excitement. While I was happy for him, my heart sank at the thought of leaving my job behind. But my love for Ethan won out, and we moved to a large house in a new city. At first, it felt like an adventure, but as time went on, a different side of Ethan began to surface. One day, he snapped at me for the clutter in our half-unpacked living room. "You need to work faster. I can't live like this," he demanded. I was taken aback but dismissed it as stress from his new job. However, as the weeks passed, it became clear that finding a job for myself in the new city was more difficult than I had imagined. When I mentioned returning to tour guiding, Ethan shot the idea down, insisting that I focus on managing our home instead. His behavior became more controlling. "Your job is to make everything perfect for me," he told me, his voice laced with authority. I reluctantly accepted, holding back my tears, longing for the man I had married. As months turned into years, my life became a monotonous cycle of endless chores and walking on eggshells around Ethan, whose demands and temper only grew worse. I once suggested hiring a housekeeper, but he exploded, accusing me of wasting his money. "Your place is to be the perfect housewife," he insisted. I tried to embrace this role, hoping it would restore the love we once shared, but Ethan's expectations kept rising with his growing career. Meanwhile, I faded into the background, managing his social media accounts, carefully curating an image of the perfect, happy couple, when in reality, everything was far from it. One evening, while preparing dinner, Ethan stormed into the kitchen, his face red with anger. "Shut up and get my food ready," he shouted. I served him the meal, but he violently rejected it, demanding I clean up the mess. As I knelt down to gather the broken pieces of the dish, I felt a deep, painful realization. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to be trapped in a life I never wanted? I bit back my tears, as suppressing them had become second nature. The next day, determined to do better, I spent hours preparing Ethan's favorite meal, but as I set the table, dread washed over me. I had forgotten to buy bread. Just as Ethan walked in, loosening his tie, he asked, "Where's my food?" "It's coming right up," I replied, rushing to serve the soup. As he sat down, noticing the missing bread, his temper flared. "Are you this incompetent?" he yelled, before sending the bowl flying off the table. Hot soup splashed across my leg, causing a sharp cry of pain. "God, you're so stupid," he muttered, leaving me alone to deal with the mess and the pain. I sobbed quietly as I cleaned, overwhelmed by the stark realization of how far I had fallen. The next morning, I woke with a new resolve. "Ethan," I said, as he was preparing to leave for work, "I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce." He turned to face me, his grin cold and menacing. "A divorce?" He laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Listen carefully, Aurora. If you leave me, I'll ruin you. You'll have nothing, no money, no reputation. You'll end up on the streets." His words struck fear into my heart, but despite his threats, I knew I couldn't keep living in this despair. That day marked a shift. Though I lacked the courage to leave immediately, I began secretly recording our conversations, saving his abusive messages, and documenting every incident. If I was going to escape, I needed evidence. As Ethan's career continued to rise, so did his arrogance. After winning a high-profile case, he decided to host a celebration at our home, demanding I prepare everything from scratch. 4 days, I worked tirelessly, cleaning and cooking, ensuring every detail was flawless. By the night of the event, I was completely exhausted. Ethan arrived home early, holding a bottle of wine, and, surprisingly, offered me a glass. "Here," he said, "you look like you could use this." The wine tasted odd, but I attributed it to my fatigue and barely noticed as Ethan hardly touched his own glass. "Go change. The guests will be here soon," he ordered. As I climbed the stairs, a wave of dizziness hit me. By the time I reached our bedroom, the room was spinning, and I collapsed onto the bed, losing consciousness. When I woke, the sunlight was streaming through the windows, leaving me groggy and confused. I walked downstairs to find Ethan's mother, Victoria, in the kitchen, her expression twisted in disdain. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," she sneered. "You should be ashamed." Still dizzy, I asked, "What happened?" "My head hurts," You got drunk and embarrassed my son in front of all his colleagues. Victoria spat. He had to call me to entertain his guests, because his wife couldn't even stand. I felt a wave of nausea. That's not true. I only had one glass of wine, I protested. Don't make excuses, she snapped, cutting me off. I've always known you weren't right for Ethan. Now everyone sees the mess you are. As she continued to berate me, pieces of the evening came back, the strange taste of the wine, Ethan barely sipping his glass, and a sudden dizziness. I whispered to myself, he drugged me. The realization hit me like a blow. After Victoria left in a huff, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Ethan had been systematically undermining my reputation. If I left him now, who would stand by me and tell my side of the story? That day, I bought a new phone, hiding it away to begin recording everything, Ethan's drunken outbursts, his late-night cleaning orders, every cruel word and threat. One recording, in particular, would come back to haunt me. It was my birthday. I had poured my heart into preparing a special dinner, clinging to the fragile hope of a peaceful evening. Ethan arrived late, reeking of alcohol, his footsteps heavy and careless. As he entered the kitchen, I discreetly pressed record on my hidden phone. What's all this? He slurred, his gaze sweeping over the carefully set table. It's my birthday, Ethan. I made dinner, I said softly, keeping my tone calm. He let out a cruel laugh. Your birthday? Who cares? Look at you, you don't deserve a celebration. His words struck me like a blow, but I held my composure, letting the recording capture every spiteful syllable. As his rant escalated, he swept the plates off the table with a sudden motion, sending food splattering across the floor I had just cleaned. Another night etched itself into the growing list of horrors I documented. At 2:10 a.m., Ethan shook me awake. Get up, he hissed, his tone sharp and unyielding. The house is filthy, clean it now. 4 hours. I scrubbed surfaces under his watchful, critical gaze, each harsh word and command recorded on my hidden phone. These recordings became my secret lifeline, concrete proof of the relentless abuse I endured. I carefully archived them, each one a step closer to reclaiming my freedom. Despite my efforts, Ethan's friends whispered behind my back, their disdain clear. Yet, I maintained the facade of a devoted wife, silently planning my escape. When our wedding anniversary arrived, I wrestled with conflicting emotions, a faint hope for change, shadowed by the weight of history. Ethan came home jubilant. I've reserved a table at the finest restaurant in town, he announced, his smile deceptively warm. I hesitated but agreed, longing for even a flicker of normalcy. Before we left, Ethan handed me a glass of lemonade, claiming he'd made it himself. His unsettling smile failed to hide the malice in his eyes. Intuition screamed at me to be cautious. I pretended to sip the drink but discreetly poured it into a nearby plant when he wasn't looking. As we drove to the restaurant, an unnatural drowsiness washed over me, my eyelids grew heavy, and soon I was barely conscious. I awoke to a nightmarish scene, Ethan dragging me from the car and hurling my purse into the shadows. This is where you belong, he sneered before driving off, leaving me in the chaos of a dangerous neighborhood. The distant sound of gunshots heightened my fear, but I forced myself to move. Spotting the flickering neon sign of a convenience store, I stumbled toward it, desperate for safety. The clerk, a young woman named Maya, looked up in alarm as I entered. Please, I begged, may I use your phone? Maya hesitated but quickly locked the door, her concern outweighing her doubt. She handed me her phone, and I dialed my friend Sadie. Ethan left me here, I explained, my voice trembling. Please, can you come get me? Sadie's response was swift and certain. I'm on my way. Stay put. As I waited, Maya's kindness was a lifeline. She offered me water and reassured me with quiet strength. You're safe here, she said. When Sadie arrived, I tried to give Maya an expensive ring Ethan had once gifted me as a token of gratitude. Maya refused. Keep it, she said. Use it as a reminder of your strength and a symbol of a fresh start. Her words stayed with me as Sadie drove us away. Aurora, Sadie said firmly, it's time you stood up for yourself. But how? I asked, my voice breaking. Ethan controls everything, money, reputation, connections. Not everything, Sadie replied with determination. I know someone in media. The world needs to hear your story. In the days that followed, Sadie connected me with a TV producer. I shared my ordeal on a widely viewed talk show, my hands trembling as I faced the cameras. Why speak out now? The host asked. Because silence isn't an option anymore, I answered, my voice steady with conviction. Too many suffer in silence, believing they're alone. I want them to know they're not. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded my phone, offering me a glimmer of hope, yet one message stood out, its menace unmistakable. It was from Ethan. "You'll regret this, you lying scum. I'll destroy you." I stared at the screen, my resolve hardening. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to fight. I showed Sadie the message, my hand shaking as I handed her my phone. Her eyes blazed with determination. "He's just sealed his fate. We've got him now." Leaving the studio, a sense of dread hung in the air, knowing a major confrontation loomed, but for the first time in years, I felt empowered, ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, legal consultations, and outreach from women's rights groups filled my schedule. Ethan's threats continued, relentless and venomous, but each one only fueled my resolve to keep moving forward. One morning, I received a call from an unknown number. "Is this Aurora?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" I replied, cautious but curious. "I'm Emery Reeves, a family lawyer. I want to offer my help with your case," she explained, her voice warm and confident. I hesitated, unsure. "I appreciate it, but I can't afford an attorney." "You misunderstand," Emery interjected. "My firm will represent you pro bono. We've been looking for a way to challenge Ethan Peterson for a long time. Your case might just be the key." It turned out Ethan had many enemies. Emery's firm had represented several clients who had been wronged by him, and they saw my case as a chance to not only help me but expose Ethan's unethical behavior. The following day, I met with Emery and her team. We dove into strategy, and I knew this wasn't just my battle, it was a fight for justice. I wasn't alone anymore. I presented all my evidence, voice recordings, text messages, everything I had secretly documented over the years. Emery's eyes widened as she sifted through the files. "This is exactly what we need, Aurora," she said with excitement. "With this, we can not only win your divorce but may even have grounds to disbar Ethan." The divorce proceedings began. Ethan, predictable as ever, fought back with fury. He painted me as an unfaithful, alcoholic wife, claiming I was trying to destroy him out of sheer spite. His lawyer stood up during the court session and declared, "Mrs. Peterson's behavior has been erratic, coupled with her substance abuse issues. These accusations are a ploy by a vindictive woman trying to ruin a hard-working man's life." It was sickening to hear, but the worst came when Ethan's mother, Victoria, took the stand. Tears streamed down her face as she fabricated stories about my supposed drunkenness. "She was a disgrace," Victoria sobbed. "My son has suffered because of her actions." I felt my stomach turn, listening to the lies they told, but Emery held my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry," she whispered, "we're just getting started." When it was our turn, Emery was a force. She played back Ethan's abusive recordings, showed his threatening texts, and exposed his increasingly erratic behavior. "And now," Emery said, her voice steady, "I'd like to call Sadie Thompson to the stand." Sadie recounted how she had to rescue me from a dangerous area, supporting my version of events. Ethan's lawyer immediately shouted, "Objection, that's hearsay." The judge, without hesitation, waved him off. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Thompson." Next, Emery called Maya, the store manager, to testify. Maya explained how I had sought refuge in her store one night and how she locked the door to protect me from Ethan's escalating violence. With each testimony, Ethan's composure began to crack, his face flushed with anger, and I could see the walls of his confidence slowly crumbling. The moment of reckoning arrived when Emery presented a toxicology report. "Your Honor, we had Mrs. Peterson's hair analyzed for long-term drug exposure," Emery said, her voice unwavering. "The results show traces of sedatives that align with her claims of being drugged by Mr. Peterson." Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Ethan shot to his feet, his face a mask of rage. "She's lying, you can't trust this," he shouted, his voice wild. The judge, calm but firm, warned him, "Mr. Peterson, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from uncertainty to disbelief. The evidence was irrefutable, and even some of Ethan's closest associates looked appalled by what had been revealed. The judge called for a recess to review the evidence. As we left the courtroom, I glanced at Ethan. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. When we returned for the verdict, the room was thick with tension. Judge Harris took a long moment before speaking. "After a thorough review of all evidence, this court rules in favor of Mrs. Aurora Peterson." A stunned silence followed. Then a shocked gasp echoed through the room. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively as the judge continued. Mr. Ethan Peterson is ordered to pay alimony, forfeit half of all shared assets, and compensate for emotional distress. Additionally, he must cover all legal expenses related to this matter. Ethan's composure shattered completely. "This is ridiculous. I'll fight this. You can't treat me like this," he yelled, his voice shrill. The judge, unflinching, turned to him. "Considering the presented evidence, you have been spared criminal charges," he added, despite Ethan's lawyer's efforts to calm him. Finally, the judge addressed me directly. "Mrs. Peterson, this court also issues a restraining order against Mr. Peterson." The words hung in the air, a final, crushing blow to Ethan's grip on my life. I stood there, a wave of emotion crashing over me, knowing I had won. No, I had finally broken free. Tears rolled down my cheeks as the judge's words echoed in my mind. "He is to keep his distance and not contact you by any means." Relief surged through me, the weight of years of torment finally lifting. For the first time I felt free, truly free. But while the legal battle had ended, Ethan's attempts to harass me continued. He used mutual friends as his messengers, sending threats and taunts. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of his car parked nearby, watching me from a distance. It was unsettling, but I no longer feared him. I knew I was stronger than he ever realized. One evening, over coffee with a close friend, she voiced the concern I had been silently grappling with. "He won't stop, will he?" I nodded, but a sense of resolve settled over me. "You're right, and I think I have a solution." Ethan's arrogance proved to be his undoing. Despite his apparent control over social media, he had neglected to change his strategist passwords. I saw an opportunity, one that might give me the final piece of power I'd been missing. I began using his own profiles to document the entirety of our divorce ordeal. Posting court documents, recordings, and narrating my side of the story, I carefully laid out the truth. The public's reaction was swift, and it was devastating for Ethan. His reputation crumbled as people saw him for what he truly was, a manipulative, abusive man. Soon, his employer distanced themselves from the scandal, leading to his resignation. His clients followed suit, abandoning him one by one. When Ethan discovered what I had done, his rage was immediate and intense. He showed up at my apartment, his face twisted with fury, threatening me with every word. I didn't hesitate. I called the police immediately, and with the recordings of his threats, they arrested him for breaching the restraining order. I stood at the door, watching as they took him away, a part of me detached, as if watching a stranger. The man I once loved was gone, replaced by someone consumed with bitterness and arrogance, undone by his own actions. Months passed, and I heard that Ethan had relocated, trying to rebuild his life in a different state. But his tarnished reputation followed him like a shadow, making it nearly impossible for him to start anew. As for me, my life had shifted in ways I never anticipated. The local women's shelter reached out, offering me a position helping others who had endured similar pain. It was a chance to turn my suffering into something meaningful, and I took it without hesitation. A year later, standing before a group of women who shared stories like my own, I realized just how far I had come. Their faces, filled with doubt and fear when they first arrived, now glimmered with hope. My story had come full circle. Not only had I survived, but I was now helping others to do the same. As I spoke to them, I could feel the strength within me growing. "Your story matters," I told them. "You are not alone." In that moment, it became clear, my fight had never been just for my freedom, it was for the freedom of others as well. My pain had transformed into a source of power, and now, I could help others break free, too. One woman in particular, Eden, reminded me of myself. She had endured years of control and isolation, but with each session, I saw her grow stronger. After weeks of support, she left her husband. The relief on her face was the same relief I had felt when I took my first step toward freedom. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "Thank you for saving my life." With each woman I helped, I began to heal, too. Word spread about the work we were doing, and I started receiving invitations to speak publicly. Initially terrified, I was encouraged by my friend Sadie, who reminded me of the impact my story could have. "You can change lives, Tiff." Your journey is a beacon of hope, she said, her voice unwavering in its belief in me. At my first speaking engagement at a local university, I stood before the crowd, nerves twisting in my stomach. But as I began to speak, a calmness overtook me. My name is Aurora, I said, and this is my story of survival. The room was quiet, and I could feel the weight of my words reaching people. Afterward, several students approached me, sharing their own stories or simply offering their support. That night, I felt the deepest sense of purpose I had ever known. Over the next year, speaking engagements across the country followed, including at women's shelters and even a TEDx event. Each time I stood in front of an audience, I was reminded of why I had shared my story: to offer others the courage to stand up for themselves, to empower those still trapped in the shadows. During this time, I also began writing a book about my journey. Revisiting my darkest memories was painful, but the act of writing became a release, a way to make sense of the chaos I had lived through. When my book was finally published, I felt a mixture of fear and pride. Sharing my story with the world was terrifying, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. The book climbed the bestseller lists, and I was invited for national television interviews. One interview, in particular, stands out. When asked if I had any regrets, I took a moment to reflect. My journey had been long, filled with pain, but it had led me to a place where I could help others find their way out. I regret the time I spent in fear and silence, I said, my voice steady. But I don't regret the path I've taken. Every hardship has brought me here, to a place where I can help others reclaim their strength. My past has become my power. In that moment, I realized something powerful. My story wasn't just about me anymore, it was about everyone who needed to hear it. And my journey was far from over. Every day presented new challenges, new opportunities to grow, and new chances to help others heal. The woman who once lived in fear had transformed into an advocate for those without a voice, a beacon of hope for anyone still trapped in the darkness I had escaped.